Ambassador Vex 917 adjusted his ornate ceremonial robes for the 100th time, his 6 eyes darting nervously around the pristine white corridors of the Galactic peace station. Today was supposed to be simple. Today was supposed to be routine. The quarterly peace summit between the mighty Kytherian Empire and those peculiar humans from the third planet of the Sol system. Remind me again why we're even bothering with these primitives, growled General Korthvac, his massive frame casting shadows across the polished floor. The Kytherian war leader's 4 arms crossed in obvious displeasure, his metallic exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lighting. Vex 917's middle eye twitched. Because, General, the High Council believes in diplomatic solutions. Besides, what harm could these soft-skinned creatures possibly cause? Oh, how wrong he was about to be. The doors to Conference Hall Alpha hissed open with mechanical precision, revealing a sight that made every Kytherian in the room pause. Where they expected to see the usual human diplomatic entourage, complete with their laughably primitive suits and briefcases, they instead found 3 humans. Just 3. The first was a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to contain the cold vacuum of space itself. She wore a simple black outfit that somehow managed to look more intimidating than General Korthvac's battle armor. The nameplate on the table read, Director Elena Vasquez, Earth Strategic Operations. The second human was younger, maybe in his 30s by human standards, with sandy brown hair and a smile that made Vex 917's skin crawl. His casual demeanor screamed danger louder than any weapon could. The nameplate identified him as Captain Jake Morrison, Special Projects Division. The third was the most unsettling of all. An elderly man with kind eyes and a grandfather's warm smile, wearing what appeared to be a cardigan sweater. Professor Henry Liu, the nameplate announced, Department of Applied Philosophy. Where's the rest of your delegation? Vex 917 asked, his voice barely concealing his confusion. Director Vasquez smiled, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Oh, we thought 3 would be sufficient for today's discussions. Captain Morrison leaned back in his chair, feet up on the conference table in a display of casual disrespect that made General Korthvac's mandibles click in irritation. You see, Vex, old buddy, we've been having some interesting conversations back on Earth about these peace summits. The name is Ambassador Vex 917, came the stiff correction. Right, Morrison waved dismissively. Anyway, we've been wondering why you folks keep asking us to leave our military at home. I mean, it's not like we're planning to start anything. We're just here to chat about peace, right? Professor Liu adjusted his glasses and opened what appeared to be an ancient paper notebook. The sight of such primitive technology in this advanced space station was almost comical. Fascinating social dynamics at play here, he murmured, as if speaking to himself. The Kytherians consistently request that Earth delegation arrive without military escort or advisors, while they themselves bring. He counted on his fingers. 17 war-class vessels, 3 battle commanders, and enough firepower to glass a small moon. The silence that followed was deafening. General Korthvac's 4 arms slowly uncrossed. Are you suggesting we have hostile intentions? Oh, perish the thought. Captain Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in his eyes. It's just that we humans, we're curious creatures. We like to understand the why behind things. So we did a little digging into your recent peace negotiations with other species. Director Vasquez opened her simple black briefcase, withdrawing what appeared to be standard data tablets. Nothing threatening about them at all. The Zeltran Collective, for instance. Lovely peaceful species. Very trusting. They came to their peace summit with only diplomats, just as you requested. And where are the Zeltrans now? Professor Liu asked conversationally, not looking up from his notebook. Vex 917's 6 eyes began to blink rapidly. They chose to join our empire voluntarily. After their homeworld was blockaded, Morrison added helpfully. Funny how voluntary choices work when you're starving. The Falarian Republic, Vasquez continued, her voice steady as laser fire. Also came to their peace summit without military presence. Also chose to join your empire. Right after their communication networks mysteriously went offline. The Kytherian delegation was shifting uncomfortably now. General Korthvak's hand moved unconsciously toward his weapon harness. These are serious accusations. Oh, we're not accusing anyone of anything, Professor Liu said mildly, still scribbling in his notebook. We're simply observing patterns. It's quite fascinating from an anthropological perspective. You invite species to peace talks, specifically request they come unarmed and unguarded, and then, well, let's just say the negotiation process becomes remarkably efficient. Captain Morrison stood up and began pacing around the room, his casual stride somehow managing to circle behind the Kytherian positions. So naturally, we started wondering what would happen if someone showed up who wasn't quite so cooperative. What are you implying? Vex 917's voice was rising in pitch. Director Vasquez smiled again, and this time Vex 917 was certain the room's temperature had actually dropped. We're implying that maybe, just maybe, Earth has been approaching these peace summits all wrong. Maybe we should have been asking ourselves why you're so insistent on us leaving our military capability at home. Your military capability? General Korthvak laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Your primitive weapons and chemical propulsion systems? Your laughable attempts at space travel? What could you possibly consider a threat to the Kytherian Empire? The three humans exchanged glances. It was Professor Liu who spoke next, his grandfatherly voice carrying an edge that made Vex 917's skin crawl. General, have you ever heard of something called MAD? Mutually assured destruction? It's an interesting concept we developed back when we were still confined to our single planet. The idea is simple: make the cost of aggression so high that even victory becomes meaningless. Captain Morrison stopped pacing and grinned. See, we humans, we're really good at finding creative solutions to impossible problems. It's kind of our thing. What exactly are you saying? Vex 917 demanded. Director Vasquez reached into her briefcase again and withdrew what appeared to be a simple communication device. I'm saying that maybe it's time for a more honest discussion about interstellar relations. She pressed a single button, the lights in the conference room flickered, and suddenly the main display screen activated, showing the space around the peace station. 17 Kytherian war-class vessels hung in perfect formation, their weapon systems powered but not targeting anything specific. Then the display zoomed out, and out, and out. What had appeared to be empty space around the Kytherian fleet was suddenly alive with movement. Ships began decloaking. Not dozens. Not hundreds. Thousands upon thousands of vessels, ranging from sleek fighters to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Kytherian ships. General Korthvak's forearms began trembling. This is impossible. Our sensors showed nothing. Oh, they're there, Captain Morrison said cheerfully. They've been there for the past 6 months. We just got really good at not being seen when we don't want to be seen. Professor Liu looked up from his notebook, his kind eyes now cold as winter. You see, we did some research on your empire's expansion patterns. Very efficient. Very predictable. Always the same strategy, peaceful negotiations backed by overwhelming force. The thing is, Director Vasquez continued, humans have this unfortunate tendency to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. When we realized you kept asking us to come to these meetings defenseless, we started to wonder what you might be planning. Vex 917's voice was barely a whisper. How many ships? Does it matter? Morrison asked. The point isn't the number. The point is that we're here, we're ready, and we're really hoping we don't have to use any of this. The Kytherian delegation sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. Their entire strategy, their entire empire, was built on the assumption that other species would approach peace negotiations in good faith, leaving themselves vulnerable to coercion. What do you want? General Korthvak finally asked. Professor Liu closed his notebook and smiled that grandfatherly smile. Peace, of course. Real peace. The kind where both sides sit down as equals and work out their differences without anyone having a gun to anyone else's head. But first, Director Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of a closing trap, we need to discuss what's going to happen to all those species you've already absorbed into your empire through these, efficient, negotiation techniques. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of revelation and the sudden understanding that the humans had just completely rewritten the rules of galactic diplomacy. Captain Morrison sat back down, feet up on the table again. So, Vex, buddy, ready to have that honest conversation about interstellar relations? The silence in Conference Hall Alpha stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Ambassador Vex 917's 6 eyes were darting between the display screen showing thousands of human vessels and the 3 impossibly calm humans sitting across from him. General Korthvac was the first to break. This is a declaration of war, he snarled, his 4 arms reaching for weapons that suddenly felt very inadequate. Actually, Professor Liu said, pulling out what appeared to be a thermos and pouring himself a cup of steaming liquid, this is a declaration of honesty. Would anyone like some coffee? I brought extra. Captain Morrison burst out laughing. Oh man, Henry, you're offering them coffee? That's beautiful. Director Vasquez remained perfectly still, her cold eyes fixed on the Kytherian delegation. General, I'd suggest you keep your hands where we can see them. You're currently outnumbered by approximately 4,000 to 1. And my colleagues get nervous when people make sudden movements. 4,000 to 1. Vex 917's voice cracked. But our intelligence report said humans barely had a functional space program. Oh, we do love our misdirection, Morrison grinned, taking a sip of Professor Liu's coffee. See, while you were busy analyzing our primitive chemical rockets and our laughable space stations, we were developing some rather interesting technologies in our spare time. Professor Liu opened his notebook again, humming softly. Fascinating psychological warfare techniques. The Kytherians gathered intelligence on human capabilities by observing our most public, most visible space programs. Meanwhile, the real work was happening in facilities that didn't officially exist, using technologies that weren't supposed to be possible. Impossible, General Korthvac muttered. You keep using that word, Director Vasquez said dryly. I don't think it means what you think it means. Tell me, General, what do you know about human military doctrine? You're a peaceful species. You spend most of your time fighting amongst yourselves over trivial disputes. Morrison nearly choked on his coffee. Trivial disputes? Oh buddy, you really don't understand humans at all, do you? Explain something to me, Professor Liu said, adjusting his glasses and looking up from his notes. In all your intelligence gathering about Earth, did you ever stop to wonder why a species that fights constantly among themselves has never actually managed to completely wipe themselves out? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Because, Director Vasquez continued, humans don't fight to destroy. We fight to win. There's a difference. And when we're not fighting each other, we're preparing for the next fight. It's what we do. Vex 917's middle eye was twitching violently now. What are you proposing? We're proposing that you made a fundamental error in your expansion strategy, Morrison said, leaning forward with that dangerous smile. You assumed that because other species were peaceful, they were also prepared for war. Humans are peaceful too, but we're also ready for war. All the time. It's our default state. Consider the mathematics, Professor Liu said mildly. Humans have been engaging in organized warfare for approximately 10,000 years. We've had gunpowder for over 1,000 years. Nuclear weapons for less than a century. In that time, we've fought hundreds of wars, developed thousands of weapons systems, and created military strategies that would make your warplanners weep. And then, Director Vasquez added, we took all that experience and applied it to space. The main display screen shifted, showing detailed schematics of human vessels. The Kytherian delegation stared in growing horror at weapon systems they didn't recognize, propulsion methods that defied their understanding of physics, and defensive capabilities that seemed almost magical. "This is impossible," General Korthvac repeated weakly. "There's that word again," Morrison chuckled. "You know what else was impossible? Splitting the atom. Flying faster than sound. Leaving our home planet. Humans have a long history of making the impossible look routine. But your technology level," Vex 917 protested. "Our scans showed primitive metallurgy, basic electronics, chemical propulsion systems." Professor Liu poured himself more coffee, the domestic action somehow more terrifying than any weapon display. "Ah yes, the technology we let you scan. Tell me, Ambassador, have you ever heard of something called compartmentalization? We showed you exactly what we wanted you to see," Director Vasquez explained. "Public space programs using deliberately outdated technology. Commercial vessels with intentionally primitive systems. Meanwhile, our real capabilities were developed in complete secrecy. For 75 years, Morrison added cheerfully. Ever since we first detected your empire's expansion patterns. We've been preparing for this conversation for 3/4 of a century." The Kytherian delegation was beginning to look physically ill. Their entire worldview was crumbling before their eyes. "What do you want?" Vex 917 whispered. "We want to renegotiate the terms of galactic civilization," Director Vasquez said simply. "Starting with the immediate release of all species currently under Kytherian protection following your peaceful negotiations." "That's impossible. Our economy, our infrastructure, our entire society depends on those tributary worlds." "Then I suggest you start developing a new economic model," Professor Liu said kindly. "One that doesn't rely on coercion and threats." Morrison stood up and walked to the viewing window, looking out at the massive fleet of human vessels now fully visible around the station. "You know what the really funny part is? We didn't want to do this. We're actually pretty fond of peaceful solutions. But you folks kept insisting on these weird diplomatic protocols." "Weird protocols?" General Korthvac snarled. "Come to peace talks without any military support," Morrison counted on his fingers. "Meet in remote locations away from your home territories. Agree to communication blackouts during negotiations. Sign agreements under duress. Yeah, that all seemed pretty suspicious to us. So we developed a counter-strategy," Director Vasquez continued. "We call it peace through superior firepower. It's worked quite well for us historically." Professor Liu looked up from his notebook with genuine curiosity. "I'm particularly interested in the psychological aspects of your expansion method. You've been using the same tactics for centuries, haven't you? Always the same approach. Never adapting, never evolving your strategy. Why would we need to evolve?" Vex 917 asked desperately. "It always worked." "Exactly." Morrison spun around, grinning broadly. "You got comfortable. Predictable. Humans hate predictability. We're always looking for new ways to solve old problems. Which brings us to our proposal," Director Vasquez said, opening her briefcase again and withdrawing a thick document. "The Treaty of Mutual Respect and Actual Peace. It's quite comprehensive." She slid the document across the table. Vex 917 picked it up with trembling hands. Article 1, Professor Liu read aloud, "All species currently under Kytherian protection shall be granted immediate independence and the right to self-determination." Article 2, Morrison continued, "The Kytherian Empire shall provide reparations to all species previously coerced into tributary status." Article 3, Director Vasquez finished, "Future diplomatic negotiations shall be conducted between equals, with full transparency and no coercive tactics." General Korthvac was staring at the document in shock. "This would mean the end of our empire." "No," Professor Liu said gently. "This would mean the beginning of your civilization." "There's a difference," Morrison added. Empires are built on conquest and fear. Civilizations are built on cooperation and mutual benefit. You're giving us a choice, Vex 917 said slowly, understanding dawning in his 6 eyes. We're giving you the same choice you gave all those other species, Director Vasquez replied. Except we're doing it honestly. You can sign this treaty and work with us to build a better galactic community, or you can refuse and face the consequences. What consequences? General Korthvac demanded. Morrison's smile turned predatory. Well, we could start by liberating every single world you've peacefully annexed. We've already been in contact with several resistance movements. They're very eager to regain their independence. Or, Professor Liu said, sipping his coffee, we could simply quarantine your entire empire. Cut off all trade, all communication, all interaction with the rest of the galaxy. Let you think about your choices in isolation. Or, Director Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, we could demonstrate why humans have never lost a war we were determined to win. The silence returned, heavier than before. The Kytherian delegation sat in stunned contemplation of their options. Finally, Vex 917 spoke. If we sign this treaty, what guarantees do we have that Earth won't simply replace us as the dominant galactic power? Morrison laughed, but this time there was genuine humor in it. Oh, we don't want to be the dominant galactic power. That sounds like way too much work. We just want to be left alone to do our thing, Professor Liu added. Trade, explore, learn, grow. The usual human activities. Besides, Director Vasquez said, human history is full of examples of what happens when we try to rule over other people. It never ends well for anyone involved. Vex 917 looked at the treaty, then at his companions, then at the display screen showing the impossible human fleet. This is really happening, isn't it? He said quietly. This is the end of everything we've built. No, Professor Liu said kindly. This is the beginning of everything you could build. If you're willing to try. The ambassador picked up a writing implement, held it over the treaty for a long moment, then signed his name with a flourish. Welcome to the galactic community, Director Vasquez said, extending her hand. The real one this time. As the Kytherian delegation filed out of the conference room, Morrison turned to his colleagues. Think they'll actually follow through? They will, Professor Liu said confidently. They're not stupid, just set in their ways. Besides, we'll be watching. Director Vasquez smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. And that, gentlemen, is why Earth never brings their military to peace summits. Because our military is already there, waiting patiently for someone to make the wrong choice. The 3 humans gathered their simple belongings and prepared to leave, their work complete. Outside, thousands of human vessels began the long journey home, their message delivered loud and clear across the galaxy: peace was possible. But it would be peace on humanity's terms, honest, equal, and backed by the absolute certainty that some fights were worth having. The age of the Kytherian Empire was over. The age of actual galactic civilization had begun.